Hey everyone, and welcome. I'm absolutely thrilled you're joining us today. We're going to be unpacking a truly fascinating recent broadcast of the Dutch alternative talk show Blackbox today. This program kind of acts as a hub for unconventional socio-political theories. Our goal in this explainer is to act as your completely neutral guide, exploring exactly how these guests view the world. Okay, let's dive into this.
So how exactly do alternative media platforms interpret today's biggest headlines? It's a great question, isn't it? We're going to act as your guide, walking through a really fascinating museum of alternative perspectives. We'll be looking at everything from economics to global health, history, and even modern family dynamics. We're not here to endorse or debunk anything, right? We just want to understand the unique lens through which these guests view reality.
And that brings us to a really provocative quote that was heavily emphasized during the broadcast: never waste a good crisis. Financial guest and lawyer Hester Buis uses this concept to argue that global emergencies, whether we're talking about health scares or international conflicts, are actively utilized by elites to push through massive pre-planned societal transitions, basically changes that the public would probably just reject under normal circumstances. All right, to make sense of this complex talk show, we've grouped these disparate arguments into 5 thematic lenses. First, the global economic transition. Second, digital identity and control. Third, alternative views on health. Fourth, reframing historical narratives. And finally, number 5, modern motherhood and society. Starting right off with Section 1, the global economic transition. Now, what's super interesting here is how Hester Buis chronologically maps out her argument. She believes a massive financial reset has been unfolding over decades, specifically to replace the US dollar's dominance with a multipolar system. She traces this all the way back to the 1971 Nixon shock that removed the gold standard, through the 2009 Lisbon Treaty, which quietly integrated energy agendas, right up to the €800 billion Corona recovery funds. She claims those funds are actually financing this massive green transition.
You know those modern economic hardships we're all feeling? High inflation rates, what she calls artificial energy poverty, and ballooning European debt? Well, according to the broadcast, these are not just unfortunate accidents. The guests argue these are deliberate symptoms. They actually believe these pressures are designed to manufacture public solidarity, basically forcing citizens to accept a financial transition out of a manufactured sense of shared necessity. It totally flips the traditional narrative of economic struggle on its head.
And this brilliantly illustrates Hester's theory on how environmentalism is essentially being weaponized into a financial instrument. She argues the ultimate goal here is to create tradable CO2 emissions, use them as brand new collateral for the banking system, and eventually enforce personal CO2 budgets on everyday citizens. So, in her view, climate change policies are fundamentally just a tool designed to control consumer behavior. Moving on to Section 2, digital identity and control.
The guests heavily connect that idea of economic tracking to the broader rollout of technological infrastructure. During the broadcast, reporter Jonathan Crispin brings up this fascinating, kind of niche term, freedom of reach. The argument is that having the right to post your opinions online doesn't actually mean much if your audience is algorithmically restricted. You have the freedom of speech to post, but not the freedom of reach to actually be heard. It leaves alternative voices feeling entirely censored and marginalized by modern tech platforms, even without outright bans.
It's like they feel trapped between 2 digital dystopias. On one side, they fear US big tech holding all their personal data in foreign American hands. But on the flip side, they're highly skeptical of a centralized EU digital ID, fearing it'll just lead to centralized European dictatorial control. Their overarching takeaway is just a profound, deep-seated distrust of centralized digital power, no matter which side of the Atlantic it's coming from.
Let's move to and see how this builds into Section 3, alternative views on health.
So we delve into a segment featuring Arjun Levers, who completely rejects mainstream virology. Arjun is a big advocate for a highly alternative medical framework called Germanic healing knowledge. Its followers completely dismiss the existence or threat of pathogenic viruses. There's literally no virus spreading in their view. Instead, they claim that what we call a disease is actually just the body's biological response, a healing phase following a severe psychological shock or conflict.
To put that into perspective and make it incredibly distinct from what most of us are used to, consider the mainstream medical view.
Outbreaks like the hantavirus or illnesses from tick bites are caused by pathogens infecting the body, right? But Argent's framework argues that mass psychosis, fear, and stress are what actually drive illness across the population. The physical symptoms are literally just your body attempting to heal from that trauma.
He uses this really specific anecdote about kennel cough in dogs to explain it. When a dog is left at a kennel, it obviously experiences separation stress. In response, its airways actually widen to help it survive what it perceives as a threat. When the owner finally returns, the biological shock ends. It's only then that the healing phase actually begins, which physically manifests as a cough. So, to Arjan, the sickness is merely the post-stress healing phase, not some contagious virus spreading from dog to dog.
All right, Section 4, Reframing Historical Narratives.
We are now gently bridging into the fourth and definitely most sensitive topic of the broadcast. Now, according to the guest's perspective presented on the show, reporter Jonathan Crispin maps out a highly controversial historical claim in his new mini-documentary. He argues that the Holocaust was not viewed as a unique, central concept immediately after World War II in 1945. Instead, his documentary claims this focus really only emerged decades later, around the 1967 Six-Day War, during the rise of identity politics, and was then later popularized by a 1978 Hollywood TV series.
The core premise of his documentary is perfectly captured in this exact quote from the broadcast. The Holocaust is instrumentalized for a political agenda. The guest's view here is that historical victimhood is currently being utilized as a shield to deflect criticism, specifically against the State of Israel, and furthermore that it's used as a tool to morally silence right-wing political voices by constantly comparing them to historical atrocities.
So, the crucial point is how this brings us to Section 5, Modern Motherhood and Society.
Marguerite Darwinkle takes the stage to describe a cause-and-effect relationship she calls the motherhood squeeze. She shows how all these massive systemic economic pressures eventually trickle right down into the home. It starts with economic policies driving up rising taxes and inflation. This forces a situation where dual incomes are no longer a conscious choice, but just a mandatory necessity for basic survival. Because both parents are forced into the workforce, institutionalized childcare becomes totally required. And she argues this ultimate chain of events leads to the systemic breakdown and loss of the natural, deeply connected family unit.
The broadcast then breaks down the massive political debate surrounding this. The left-wing, socialist fix to this pressure is to provide free, state-funded childcare, maintaining that dual-career focus. Conversely, the right-wing, conservative fix, which is advocated by some guests on the show, is to drastically lower taxes so that single-income households can actually survive. This would return the freedom of choice back to parents to raise their kids outside of state care.
And that brings us to our final thought, tying all 5 of these alternative lenses together. Whether we are looking at the global economy, digital infrastructure, our views on health, our history, or even how we raise our kids, the underlying question from this broadcast remains exactly the same. Are we actually making conscious choices, or are we simply reacting to the massive, invisible systems built around us? It's a really provocative thought, designed to make you look twice at the mainstream narratives. I hope this explainer has provided a clear, completely impartial window into how alternative media frames the world. Thanks so much for learning with me today, and hey, stay curious.